it right. Good morning, everyone. So, I'm kind of famous for being honest. I will be very honest with you. I have some health issues going on. That's my phone. And I just got on the news from home that someone got into hospital, so I will do my best to keep this together. But we are humans, so I thought to share, because we are humans after all. It's a good speech, so if in case, I pass out halfway, someone can just finish it, please. So yeah, thank you so much for the honor of having me here today. And when I'm asked to give a speech, I don't really know who the audience is going to be, so I don't really prepare so much, because I want to engage with you. And also today, I want to give us the chance to get to know each other. What I come with, though, is the notion that we need to acknowledge one thing and accept one thing, that we all come with our own set of truths, and we all are the product of our own environment. Here is a clear example for that. When in my younger ages I dated a Russian guy, that Russian guy was taught that the Russians came to Hungary to free us. I learned that they came to occupy us. And we can twist the facts towards both narratives, but at one point we need to be morally honest. If someone is coming to free us, they don't stay for 50 years and impose a regime on my country. The example is no different from the ones that we hear day after day when it comes to argument from seemingly pro-Palestinian people. If Israel is really a colonizer, why did they choose a deserted place? I mean, there is nothing to get rich from. And if Israel is really an apartheid, why is the demographical number of the Arabs are actually on the upward trend? You get the point. We can go on and on. Narratives can be twisted to both ways, but at the end of the day, there has to be certain facts. Me holding anti-Semitic views until 10 years ago is a great example here that we are all a product of our environment. I was born in 1985 in Hungary, so it was still the communist regime there. And I was born into an era where we had no internet, no social media, no globalized informational source. So all I saw was the synagogue beside my dance school. I was a classically trained ballet dancer. And all I saw was the Hasidic Jews there. That's all I knew about the Jews. And then the Jewish jokes, that you only help each other, you have the big nose, you are the rich ones, you rule the world. That's how I grew up. So while I can bring up a whole line of explanations of why I held anti-Semitic views, there is nothing else to say here that actually I was a product of my environment, and I don't even know if I ever met a Jew at this point. But I had this very firm point. It's very easy to hate what we don't know. But here is another example from a different perspective. A couple of years ago in New York, I attended a Yom HaShoah event, and there was a Holocaust survivor from Romania. And he told his story, and then I went to him and I apologized on behalf of my nation from the past. And he looked me into the eye and he said, "It doesn't matter what you say, you are an anti-Semite, it's in your blood." I didn't really know how to handle it morally, so I cried until the way home. I wrote an article which interestingly Aish HaTorah published. That's my healing process, writing. And today I realized that I would handle the situation very differently, because I am not responsible for what happened 70 years ago. My generation is not responsible for that. What I am responsible for is that it never happens again. So there is a lot to unpack here, and I'm really not here to give you history lessons or to anger you even further, because we all know how horrible the situation is out there with the level of anti-Semitism currently. What I'm here to give you is perhaps a little glimpse of hope, and that we need tools to end this madness, which is the delegitimization of Israel and the dehumanization of the Jews. But in order to do that, we need to be extremely honest with ourselves, and here is the challenge for you. How often are you questioning yourself whether the point of view that you have is actually unshakable truth? How many times are you okay to say, "Oh, maybe I got it wrong this time"? And you might ask how I got to my perspective today. Well, let me tell you something, it didn't happen overnight. I met an Israeli guy in 2011. I didn't want to date him because he was a Jew. Then he told me, "Let's go to Israel." And I was like, "There are way too many Jews there. I'm not really sure I'm ready for that." Am I proud of that? No, but I said honesty is the first step towards change. Once again, I need to reiterate something. Being ignorant and growing up on stereotypes versus being extremely hateful towards Jews are two different kinds of anti-Semitism. I fell into the first category. I didn't know any better. I did go to Israel. My life changed completely the moment I touched base on Ben Gurion. I went back 22 times ever since. And what started to be as like, I'm a good tourist, I enjoy the beach and the shuk and the Negev. Eventually, I started to interview people. I started to talk with the Arabs in East Jerusalem. That was an experience. Then I started to talk with IDF soldiers, and I went so deep in it that I wanted to understand how come I had these views about the Jews and how come the world is so hypocritical and using double standard against Israel. So I went as crazy as that I enrolled to a Jewish Studies master's program here in the States. And as the first non-Jewish person, I convinced the dean that actually he should get me into this program. Without any yeshiva background, he said, like, you're crazy, but I'm like, okay, let's do this. So I graduated in my master programs. And the reason I wanted to do that, because it's one thing to have a nice story, but I wanted to have the knowledge. I wanted to become more credible. I wanted to actually know the facts. I wanted to be unbeatable when I'm on the streets or at events. And so, during the last decade, my way of activism has changed a lot. When we are in our 20s, we think that if we go into a room with a vehemency of a military tank, we're going to win. That's the 20s about, right? We always think we can change the world. And then in my 30s now, I'm way more calmer, and I understand that eventually everything that is related to people comes down to one thing: psychology. It's really the game of that. We are dealing with humans. So nowadays, my rule is very different than what it was back then. Back then, when we go to a pro-Israel activist, we would just yell louder, and we felt that the louder we are, the better we are at, conveying the message. That's not really true. In fact, we are helping the other side with that because they just think that, okay, they are actually right. It's an ego game. Nowadays, I have a 3-minute rule. I give them 3 minutes. During that time, I'm calmer than the Buddha himself. And I'm just asking questions. Like, I want to figure out how he is the product of his own environment. Did you grow up in an Arab community that was teaching you to hate Jews? Did you really grow up hating Israel? Do you even know where Israel is on the map? So, like, light questions. At the end of the day, I want to have 2 answers. And the 2 questions are, do you agree that Israel has the right to exist? Number 2, do you agree that killing Jews is not something to celebrate? If we can agree on these 2, we have a chance for a discussion. If not, then I'm facing a clear-cut anti-Semite and a Jew hater, and that person will only change when he, as an individual being, is ready to change. I cannot help anyone to get sober unless they are ready. And I don't believe in the kumbaya kind of approach either. So I don't believe that hugging a Hamas supporter or hugging a Neturai Karta member is going to change anything. Because at the end of the day, the dark cannot be changed by you or me. What we can change is ignorance. And that's where we need to tap in. What we can change are the UN textbooks that currently enable 320,000 kids to learn mathematics by counting dead Jews. What we can change is the perception on education, because we all are endorsing education in so different ways. But one thing you need to understand that education is important, but depending who is educating. If I would have not changed my perception about the Jews, I can educate my future kids, but they're gonna grow up with the same anti-Semitic views. So unless we change, education is just a vague concept. Today I only work with Jewish nonprofits and organizations, helping them to create a better future where Jew hatred has consequences, where Jew hatred has something to be shameful of, and when Jew hatred is not a socially accepted form of discrimination. Anti-Semitism comes in all forms of shapes, and as I mentioned before, changing hatred is not impossible, but almost a futile game. But where we need to put our attention is to changing. The second one is the ignorance, and I hope that my story shows that their change is really possible. The impact of our work is really hardly measured in this niche, if you ask me. It's really, really difficult. So here are a couple of my metrics. When a Jewish person writes to me that he went to Hungary because of my blog or my writings, so he decided to go to Hungary even though his whole family perished during the Shoah, that is success to me because he writes me after that he found his family roots and now he felt safe in Hungary. Because yes, factually, it's not an opinion, but factually today Hungary is the safest country in Europe for Jews. It has several reasons why, but that is a fact. Unfortunately, I cannot convince you about that, especially if your whole family perished that. You are holding a preconception about Hungary. So the same way I changed, the change has to come, from both sides for a better future. Another impact is when, for example, a non-Jewish German goes to Israel because of my activism, and then he reports back, oh, Israel is actually not an apartheid. I was like, yeah, now you see. And this is why I'm very, very careful. I almost despise the concept of cancel culture. Because I believe that cancel culture is the most anti-human thing we are creating in our generation. I'm not the same person I was a year ago, and hopefully I won't be the same in a year's time. Imagine if we would have a world where we don't change and we stay the same all the time. We might as well be zombies walking around. So canceling people out just because they say something is not the right way. Of course, there is a protocol or a strategy to follow here. So for example, when someone says something anti-Semitic, let's examine first whether that's a returning incident or it was a one-time, first-time thing. If it's a first-time incident, let's educate that person, let's reach out. Let's ask them, do you know why that sentiment was anti-Semitic? The problem is that we really need to remind ourselves that what we know is not necessarily what everyone else knows. So what you assume that, for example, a non-Jew would understand why a certain thing is anti-Semitic is not entirely true. Sometimes we say things and we don't even think that lands as an anti-Semitic remark. It's on you to educate the other side as well. And this is something that the LGBTQ community is doing masterfully, and so is the Black community. They really reached a point where the other side understands what to say and what not to say. Whether they went overboard is a different question, but here is an experiment I played once. When I was dating that named Israeli person, at one point he really didn't understand why I think there is so much anti-Semitism out there. So we changed Facebook for a day. And I said, you can only use my Facebook, I only use your Facebook. And then at the end of the day, I was mastering craftsmanship and Maccabi, sports people and everything. And he looks at me and he's like, oh my God, is it really that bad? Was that two guys really, really beaten up in Williamsburg for being a Jew? And I said, yes. But what that little experiment showed me is how our confirmation bias is at play. You cannot convince a person that there is anti-Semitism unless he felt it on his skin. So me being not Jewish, unfortunately, doesn't protect from me anymore of this world. I get death threats every day, just because I'm a Zionist. And that's a wake-up call for everyone. Because this, what we are talking about, is not solely a Jewish issue. It's way deeper than that. It's a lot of ideological issue there as well. I put down another example here, for example, because I might think that we have a couple of journalists, so there is a note to you. When you're so proudly and angrily write down that there was another blood libel against the Jews, understand that nobody understands what you're talking about, unless someone is a very educated Jewish person. I only know what blood libels are because I did a master program in Jewish studies, but not everyone needs to do that. So calling out people on something that they don't understand what it is, that's just a false policy. Instead, educate that person. This is how we can change the world. It's a lot of patience, and I didn't change overnight, so we need to give time for society at large to change. And do not get me wrong, I do lose my grit here and there as well. Like a few days ago, I really wanted to give up. I actually went to Colorado, I switched off my social media, and I was like, I don't know what to do next. It was because of Bella Hadid. I don't know if you heard about her. Bella Hadid is a beautiful lady, influencer, millions of followers. She has, I think, like 3 times more followers than Jews in the world. And then she said something about She posted a video how an IDF soldier is beating up a kid randomly. And she basically influenced over 5 million people effortlessly. She posted that, and everyone just believes that yes, IDF is beating up kids because that's their hobby. But it gets better because this Bella Hadid, she's a millionaire. And yet, according to the UN, she is a refugee because her dad is allegedly a Palestinian refugee. So she lives in America, being a millionaire, under the pretense of being a refugee. And she's influencing minds against Jews. She's inciting hatred. But then again, you have so much freedom of speech here that she can do that. But it's very disheartening sometimes, when I know how much the people I work with work, or how much you guys at JNF work. And so much strategy goes into something, and yet sometimes it feels like we're up against the wall. And then comes a beauty queen, and she just says something, and the world eats that up. It's a very dangerous game. But we all need to remember that silence is violence. Silence is compliance. So hence, I came back from Colorado, and here I am, back in the battle again, and I can't stop it. Thank you. And this is why I'm incredibly proud and honored and taking it as a full responsibility, really to be part of the first actual civil rights movement of the Jewish communities, and that is called the End Jew Hatred. It's a grassroots movement that we launched with a couple of people. It's really grassroots, non-partisan. If you believe in ending Jew hatred, you have a place there. And it's also why I'm incredibly proud and take part at this breakfast sponsored by and powered by JNF. And when I sat down at your CEO in New York with Russell, and we talked about reclaiming Zionism, that was one of the highlights of my work, because the way he thought about how we need to reclaim something that was perverted so badly, I couldn't agree more with him. Because Zionism is a beautiful term, but we perverted it. And it's again because they had a beautiful PR slogan after Durban, Zionism is racism. And that made the trick. People don't think, they follow. So the goal with End Jew hatred might be a little utopian here and there. But what would life mean without such high-flying dreams? And I really, really believe that we can move the needle. But we all have a role in this. We all need to be the light. Because one candle can light another one. We should never forget the past, but just as a good therapist would tell you not to relive your traumas every day, I would like you also to put the emphasis on the future. We need to remember the past, learn from the past, but not live in the past. You have no idea how one gesture actually changes one's perspective. So I often say at my speech, and this is pretty much the end, is that if you are a Jewish person and you have non-Jewish neighbors, do invite them for a Shabbat dinner, because I know how much those Shabbat dinners changed my life. When I went to Israel for the first time, I was there for 2.5 weeks, from Rosh Hashanah to Elat and in between. And I attended the most amazing Shabbat dinners, very secular ones, many Orthodox ones, and I just felt at home, and I understood the beauty of Judaism. And I understand some of you probably ask why I don't convert. That always comes up. Zionism and Judaism are two parallel opportunities in my life. Zionism for me is a civil rights movement. Judaism is something I find peace at, and we will see what the future brings. And yes, I did the DNA test. And yes, probably I'm the only one in Eastern Europe who doesn't even have 0.01% of Ashkenazi blood. That was seriously the worst day of my life when I found it out. So, we all have different roles to play in amplifying change. And I want to tell you, please never underestimate yours. Not everybody needs to go on the street and fight as an activist. But whenever you interact with a person, you're not only a US Dan or US Juliana, you are there as a Jewish person, and you're also representing Israel. Because when I'm here, I'm not only here as Virag. You're going to have a perception in Hungary based on how you get to know me, and that's worth remembering. So really, thank you for inviting me this morning. Thank you for your hospitality, and thank you all, each and every one of you, for being part of the struggle to fight against Jew hatred, whether it comes from ignorance or just plain conscious hate. Thank you for being the light for our future generations. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. And I know that we have some mics in the room going around, so I welcome questions, and don't be afraid. I can answer anything at this point. We have a question here in the front. My built-in person.
Phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. I have a question for you,
Yes.
because you have a public voice. So there was an article. Obviously, we've had some tremendous violence over the last month in Israel, and there was an article written in an American newspaper. Doesn't matter which one, but a very well-known American
York Times.
newspapers.
I will say, but you cannot say.
That,
Yes.
and the article said that if you think showing pictures of the Abraham Accord and all of these people getting together is creating world peace, it's doing just the opposite. It frankly pisses us off that you guys have gotten together. How would you respond to that?
Responding to the New York Times has been a challenge, and I know there is, smarter people than I am, and they can challenge. You fight with your own tools. It's really a difficult question because they have such an audience that, again, is not necessarily the one that you can shift. And considering how many Jewish people work at the New York Times, how am I to answer that? Like, we all know people like Noam Chomsky and who misuse their Jewishness, and Noam Chomsky is definitely the one who is going at the UN as a proud Jew and talking about Israel being an apartheid and executing genocide. So, to answer your question, you beat it with facts, but even more so with stories. Like, New York Times made a major mistake last May when they had that little girl's face who was killed in Syria, not in Israel, and yet they published it. The problem with the world we created, that we created a really lukewarm world. Nothing matters anymore. Facts don't matter. And my dad grew up in the Soviet Union, and he was a journalist, and he told me he had one rule. There is no censorship, but you can only write what we tell you to write about. But he said there was something that did work. That journalists had responsibility. If they made a mistake, they actually had to face consequences. Today, it doesn't exist. How come the New York Times is still able to function after that major mistake? Showing a dead little kid who was already dead 3 years before by Syrians. So you can't really fight that, honestly. What you do is that you try in your micro level changing people, and that starts a domino effect. New York Times is, from the top to the bottom, and what I believe in is that you change your neighbor, their kids will change, and their kids will change. So I'm really on the grassroots level. Hope it answered your question, but again, even Camera as an institution, cannot really do anything with them. But good point.
Good morning. My name is Dr. David Simone. Thank you for your speech, and thank you for considering Jewish people as nice people. That really helps us in this room. I'm the guy who helped get David Friedman to be ambassador of Israel, worked with President Trump, and to create the embassy
So
in
you should be
Jerusalem.
giving the speech here, not me.
Oh, no, it's a question. So did you visit the Jerusalem embassy?
So I did not have the chance because then COVID came very quickly after that. So I know it was like a little lag in time, but I have not visited yet.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And for everybody in the room that thinks Iran should have a nuclear bomb, I'm going to say that's not a good idea. If you could please support my work with our teammates. See, we're all teammates in here as Jewish people. And I'm a Gulag grandkid. I'm sure some of you are as well. My grandparents escaped in the middle of winter and buried their firstborn son, frozen to death. So what we have is this common Jewish struggle. So this calling of Israel as apartheid, originally when I grew up, Israel on the map included the Sinai Desert. And it's not our fault that Jimmy Carter got it backwards.
Yeah, I know. There is a lot to unpack here. Let's get to some more questions. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Alex Saselski.
Where am I? Look. Oh, there
Right
you go.
here.
Sorry
Yeah.
for the light.
So a hard question.
Yeah.
Young Israelis and some of our kids are comfortable with saying they are anti-Zionist while being proudly Jewish, but anti-Zionist because of the way that Israel behaves towards the Palestinians. And that's the language that they use in social media. Some of them try to make a distinction, but the terminology is important. There's even congregations here in the area which are explicitly anti-Zionist yet proudly Jewish. What do we say? What do you say?
I'm taking notes. I'm not being impolite. I just don't have a pen. Dehumanization. So that's actually today anti-Zionism is the contemporary form of anti-Semitism, and that's again a fact. Back then, it was that Jews poisoned the water to kill the Christians in the medieval ages. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And today, it's Israel killing the Palestinian kids the same way, not giving them water. So it's the same thing, just, different name for that. I had the chance and pleasure to meet Natan Sharansky. I'm sure I don't need introduction to him. And for me, he's still the best how he describes the proving points why anti-Semitism is most of the times also anti-Zionism, and anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. He has this 3D rule, which is delegitimization of Israel, dehumanization, and the demonization of Israel. If anything you say fall under these three categories, your anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. If you can make it out of this 3D, then you actually formed a criticism towards Israel. And you can say, okay, Israel is not perfect. I see on college campuses how dangerous that is. But really, the kids, and this is something we touched upon last night with a couple of people, if your kids, by the time they go to college, don't have a very strong Jewish identity, unfortunately, it's very hard to fight the other side, because kids want to belong to the cool kids group. And the cool kids group is the BDS group. The cool kids group are, the ones smoking secretly under the stairs, but it's also the ones who are spreading false news about Israel. So it's an unpleasant situation to be a Jewish student on college campuses, because you actually need to make a choice. Whether I want to be there and just study and have fun like everybody else, and listening to my professor talking and teaching lies after my own heritage, discriminating me if I want to go against that. Or I'm going to choose the tougher path and I'm going to stand up as a proud Jew no matter what. But then you become a target. So to answer your question, anti-Zionism is 99% anti-Semitism. And anyone who uses this 3D is it's a very great tool to use even on the streets or to your neighbors. Form a criticism, and if it's not dehumanizing Israel, delegitimizing or demoralizing it, or putting it in a double standard, then we got a point, we can talk. But other than that, you are an anti-Semite, and you better face that. Nobody else? Oh, I expected so much about like Hungary and Ukraine and all that. I came prepared. And just for the record, I actually asked for the tennis ball at the beginning of my speech, because usually I have this icebreaker thing that I throw tennis balls, but then I saw the salmons and things and I said, I'm just gonna break everything.
Tennis ball in here, not a good idea. Anyway, hi, my name is Janina Lerner. I just had a question. We know a lot of Eastern Europeans from the business we're in. I just don't have, they don't seem anti-Semitic at all. I've never been to Hungary or Eastern Europe. Can you just comment on the attitude towards Jews in Eastern Europe a bit and Hungary? Because, oh, there's a mic. I'm just don't know about that. I'm kind of curious. I'm more aware of what's going on in Western Europe.
I appreciate the question. I'm going to focus on Hungary because Poland and the other Eastern European countries have their own thing. And I'm not so well versed on that because I've never lived there. I don't speak the language, and I think that's important. Hungary, we do have our past, undoubtedly. I do believe that the current government, and I am actually proudly endorsing them without, hurting any political feelings here, but I know the other side, I know what communism is, and the current government for me represents freedom. But even more so when it comes to the Jewish population, Hungary is the safe haven now in Europe, and that is a fact. If you check statistics, even by people who don't like us, they cannot make up very bad statistics. So last year we had 23 reported anti-Semitic attacks. None of them were violent over verbal, stupid joke, or a comment on a Jewish person, which is obviously not good, so don't get me wrong on that, but it's not like throwing out an elderly Jewish woman from the window in France, Sarah Halimi's case. I'm heavily involved in the campaign against the legal system in France because that has to be questioned. It cannot be that a Jew can be killed in her own home and then thrown out of the window, and then the guy is not in jail because he was high on weed. What kind of precedent that shows? So I'm firmly believing that this could not happen anywhere in Hungary and either in Eastern Europe at large. Hungary currently have a really nice Jewish population still, regardless of all the preconceptions, especially in Budapest. We have registered, or the people that we know are Jewish, around 200,000 Jewish people. The synagogues are being renovated constantly. The government is giving a lot of money to the renovation and building up the renaissance of the Jewish culture. But even more important is really, if you go around the shuls and the Jewish schools, you don't see tanks, you don't see police cars. They can go to shul without fearing that they're gonna be shot down or beaten up, and I think that is what we need to measure. And I think it thanks to a couple of things. One of them might not sound too politically correct, but I think I can say that. We really don't have a Muslim population which would come with the hateful agenda against the Jewish communities. Again, I'm not categorizing all Arabs badly, but we all know that there is a problem when it comes to that. I lived in Brussels. It's a different demographic, different issues. There, my now ex-Israeli boyfriend continuously had to hide the fact that he was Israeli, and we could never say that we were in Israel or anything. It had to be a secret. In Hungary, it's great. And you meet Israelis all the time because they come there, because they feel safe, and they wear the kippah, and they are not being attacked. And the other thing, we have a very strong Holocaust education. It's a mandatory for everyone in high school, and even if in certain college programs. I remember they took us, to all the Holocaust museums and explained what happened, including the Hungarian involvement. So we were not really whitewashing our own history. I think it's extremely important. And the other thing that might not be very comfortable for you to hear, but we don't really have such a freedom of speech. It's a culture that I grew up in that, for example, if you deny the Holocaust, that's a felony. That's a felony. And here, I'm at Washington Square Park in New York, and I see guys burning Israeli flags in front of the police officer, and I'm standing there with my culture shock, like, really? Is that really freedom of speech or hate speech? So I'm still undecided about the fine line between the two. And just again, with my little social experiments, whenever I'm home, I wear t-shirts that are either Hebrew or IDF related, or saying something in Hungarian about Jews or something, and I'm keep on waiting that someone beats me up. Obviously, my mom loves this idea. But I really want to prove a point with that, because I am among the people, so not the politicians, but actually people on the street. And if they're okay with me wearing the IDF t-shirt, I think it's a safe place. Doing that right now in Bushwick or even in the Upper West Side is not such a safe game. So I hope it answers your question. I do believe that anti-Semitism that we experienced before the Shoah and during those years shifted to the West. And right now, Eastern Europe is a way safer place for the Jewish communities than Western Europe. So that is really a fact, and I'm more than happy to always provide. So I try to be very objective, regardless of my very patriotic Hungarian heart. I do call out my government on things. And just like now, I was at home, and 2 blocks from me, there was a swastika on a building. I called the police, and then they washed it off. So things happen. There are rotten apples everywhere. We cannot eliminate stupidity, ignorance, and the human nature. But what we can do is to hold it at bay and make sure that Jews are not afraid to go on the street. And I think we are on a good level of that now in Hungary.
Thank you for coming to speak. My name is Gail Eisenberg. My question is, you mentioned about usurping the word Zionism. There's certainly a number of people who come to Zionism because of a end of days theology. Do you see any danger in that kind of acceptance of Zionist principles? Or should we be worried about those who come to Zionism and accepting those of us who are pro-Israel from such theologies?
Okay, so Zionism, again, I did a master, so I know the religious aspect of that. But I think where we often go wrong is that when we start to say Zionism started 3,000 years ago and God promised the land to the Jewish people. Unfortunately, you start with this and my generation walks out of the room. They don't even know what happened 2 years ago, not 3,000 years ago. So I think a very good way of reframing and reclaiming Zionism is really through approaching it as a civil rights movement. And again, if you personalize it, I don't know where you are from, maybe from the States, but every country has a history for their own struggle for their sovereignty and nationality and self-determination. So when I say that in 1848 my country fought against the Austro-Hungarian Empire and we wanted to be independent, that was our form of Zionism endeavor. We wanted our freedom. And then in 56, when we fought against the Russians, that was another form of Zionism. We just didn't call it that way because we called it the Hungarian Revolution, but it's the same thing. And the moment you make people understand that the country they are from probably had their own Zionistic endeavors, they just called it differently, you humanize the concept of Zionism and you make people understand that without sovereignty, they would not have their own nation state. So it's, again, something that we need to reclaim. And I often meet people who say, oh, let's just say it differently, let's call it differently. Such as let's not use the word nationalism or feminism because they are all so perverted today. And I have a different strategy. No. We say it because they are beautiful terms in and of itself. The fact that the other side or some people like to pervert it, that's not on us. And the moment we stop saying, I'm a proud Zionist, the other side won. And we don't need to look for other terminologies. No, this is something of a beautiful term. Zionism is just the most beautiful term. And if everyone has the right for their country, why the Jewish communities and the Jewish people don't? So again, I hope I did answer some of your questions in that, but just be a proud Zionist and unshakable. And I obviously can't ask everyone, to go on the street and be as proud to be beaten up, but it's all your personal comfort zone, how far you can go with your pride. But without being proud of who you are, you can't expect other people to respect you. And that's an extremely important message. If you're hiding your kippah, if you're hiding your Jewishness, don't expect a non-Jew not to attack you. That's very important. Thank you. You done?
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
And she held up the whole time. It was unbelievable. In respect to time, I just want to, not respect your time, I want to just add a few comments. Who's got your back? A couple of years ago, we had 3,000 families a month moving from France, not to New York, not to Pittsburgh, but to Tel Aviv. Over the last 120 days, and the numbers are a little bit old, the Israelis have accepted 30,000 Ukrainians into their country. If you were to extrapolate that into the US population, it's about 1.3 million people that we let in the door in the last 2 or 3 months. Who's got your back? And who's got Israel's back? We do. And I think that's the thought that I would love to see everybody leave here with tonight. Thank you to our co-chairs, Sam, Jamie, Jonina, and Matt, for this wonderful morning. Thank you to JNF Professionals. And again, thank you to JNF Professionals who put this wonderful event together. I hope we're not waiting another 3 years. And thank you for joining us this morning. Watch your email for information about future JNF USA, and check out our website, jnf.org. Have a great day, everybody. Be good.
את החושך, תני לו לעבור, אני לא